This is Art Is, a podcast for artists, where we talk about all things top of mind for emerging artists. I'm Isotta, and I'm an artist. I make sculpture, and I'm currently really interested in exploring how making sculpture with marble, a truly ancient material, can get us as humans in touch with deep geologic time. I'll be sharing more about my practice throughout this season, which is a new thing for me, because I started this podcast back in 2021 as a recent art school grad, grappling with starting my professional practice in the pandemic and feeling very lost and alone. Working on this pod helped me expand my horizons creatively and intellectually. So here we are, 3 years later, still making the show, but now with an amazing co-host.
And I'm Lauren. I'm an artist and a career coach for creatives. I help artists and creatives master their mindset, align with their purpose, and make money doing work they love. Lately, I've been working on my acrylic and gouache cake paintings, and most interested in learning more about the intersection of emotional well-being and spirituality, especially as it relates to life as an artist.
Welcome back to Art Is, a podcast for artists. I'm so excited to be joined today with Leslie, who is an incredible artist and inspirational storyteller who has traveled all over the world and has some really exciting experiences to share with us today. So, Leslie, perhaps we can begin just by learning a little bit about you and your art practice and, a little bit about your story.
Okay, well, I was born in California, and I was born in a little town that I'm fourth generation of this little town, which is very rare in California. And I had two grandfathers that basically very much influenced my life. One was a gun-toting, cattle herding, stagecoach driving sheriff in the county, and the other was an artist. One taught me to love adventure and wild country, and the other taught me to draw. So my grandfathers kind of set the tone for the passions of my life. And so I didn't get really started on the art path. My parents were very sick in my 20s, and so when they died, I went back to art school. And when I was studying for my master's, I got a master's from George Washington University in Washington, D.C., and I didn't have to attend classes, so I decided I'm going to move to the south of France because I'd been wanting to travel, but my parents had been sick, and I couldn't get a travel buddy, and I just, finally just I was freed up, and I went back to school, and I just, moved to the south of France to paint my master's thesis. And I was painting. I like to paint. My painting has always been to tell a story, and so I was painting people doing what they do in the hill villages in Provence. And so I was painting on the street one day, and someone stopped and said, would you like to have a show? And I said, sure. It was my first show, and it was in Monaco, and I just jumped at the chance. So when the show went pretty well and I sold a lot of paintings, I thought, this is the path of my life. I'm going to travel. I'm going to paint what I see and feel and experience from the culture and try to tell a little bit of their story. And and then go back, try to sell those paintings to earn enough money for the next trip. So that's what got me started.
That must have been pretty against the grain to leave the United States and to go to France. And I guess it's kind of like the romantic ideal of what the artist's life is. But I know that wasn't the end of your travels. So what happened next?
Well, when I got back to present my thesis and I had sold a lot of the paintings, they said, well, why don't you just frame the sales receipts? We laughed, and I had to repaint my thesis. But for a while, I painted I traveled around the Mediterranean, and I would do shows every time. And I moved back from Washington, D.C. I met my husband, and we moved back to California. And it was a little more difficult to travel to Europe then, so I was traveling to Central America. And I had a show, and a woman walked up to art can bring so many exciting things to your life. A woman walked up to I had done a show from a series of paintings I'd done in Guatemala, and a woman walked up and said, um, "I love this painting. Would you be interested in a trade?" And I said, "Well, what's the trade?" And she said, "Well, I do river rafting trips to visit archaeological ruins on the Usumacinta River to visit Mayan ruins in Chiapas and southern Mexico." And I said, "Well, yes, that's just perfect." So the thing that's interesting about the Mayan art, and I just got back from a trip to Algeria to see 20,000-year-old rock art. So art has been such an important part of civilization forever, since the cave paintings that are 20,000 years old. I was very interested in the Mayan art, and it was built to be seen from the river because that's the only way they could travel in those days. And, modern now we most people arrive by an airport and come in the back door, so they don't see the way it was meant to be seen. So I just got fascinated by this work, and I was doing a lot of just painting from I love to paint other people's beautiful carvings. I had done that from the casino in Monte Carlo. That was part of my first show, and then so I was painting these incredibly sophisticated carvings, and going through these ruins, and I saw this guy walking through. He was wearing a white tunic and he had long black hair, and I asked my guide, "That guy just kind of keeps appearing and disappearing. Who is he?" And he said, "Oh, well, he's a Lacandon, and it's forbidden for them to be here because they are natives, and these sites are reserved for tourists." And he said, "But he's a Lacandon, and this is their sacred site. This was built by his ancestors." And so obviously he wasn't paying a lot of attention to the restriction, but I did a sketch of him and came back and did a very large painting of him in the jungle. And I didn't know who he was. I just saw him. I went back the next year because I had been invited to do a show in Palenque for a Mayan conference, and the people that were running the conference were just then translating the Mayan glyphs from these Lacandones it was their language. So they had never been affected by the Spanish conquest. So I was sitting in at my show, and this guy in a white tunic and long black hair walks up to the painting I had done, and he said, "That's my brother." And it just blew me away. So through my guide, I got communicating with him because he didn't speak English or Spanish. And so I asked him if I could follow him around in the jungle for a few days to sketch him. And he said very happily, said yes. And so I did. And we communicated through my guide, and I did a whole series of paintings on him. And I was supposed to go back for another show in Palenque, and there was a Zapatista uprising. I couldn't go back. It was dangerous. And I had this money saved and time set aside, and I wanted to go someplace. And I'd been so fascinated by the comfort that he had in his own skin. He was just he'd walk through the jungle not making a sound. I would be crashing through like an elephant. And he was I just fell in love with the idea of him and the presence of him. So I wanted to find more of that. And I thought, well, the best place to look would be Africa. So I booked a cross-country trip from Togo to Senegal, a 3,000-mile trip. And that was my first trip to Africa. I was mugged and got caught in a tribal war, and I also fell in love with Africa. After that trip, I came home and I just threw myself into not only painting what I'd seen, but researching because I felt like I had been observing, but not, there was no depth to what I was getting. And so I wanted to get more of it. And so I read everything I could read. I, I watched films and I saw a book called Nomads of Niger by Carol Beckwith. And I saw a film that she had done. And I just was determined to get to the Nomads of Niger from my research because there's just incredible festivals and they're just have a very traditional culture. And couldn't get there. I finally found an old ad from a woman who had led tours to Niger, but I called her and she said, "Oh, I can't do that anymore because there's a there's a rebellion going on. But if you're interested in tribal cultures, come with me to Ethiopia." So I did. And on that trip, I uh, I became very good friends with this woman. Her name was Irma Turtle. And she said, "Well, I am going to Niger after this trip. If you'd like to come and share expenses with me, I can't do an official trip because I think it's probably still dangerous, but I want to find out if I can bring tours back there." So I jumped at that chance and got to hip hopped all the way across east to west in Africa. Is very difficult. And after 6 stops between Addis Ababa and Niamey, Niger, I got to Niger and she knew Carol Beckwith's guide. So he knew the Wadabi, and we went north, and that's when I met my first nomad. And that man, Pierogi, became his family became my family for 15 years.
Wow. And out of curiosity, what year was this? The first trip?
That was 94.
Okay, in 94. Wow. And so you said 15 years. So you ended up spending a lot of time there and um
I'm going back to Niger in November. I lived in Niger for probably 10 years. I had a home there that I built, and then terrorists moved in and it became a little too dangerous to live there, but I still go back. I go back with 20 armed guards now, which is not very much fun, but um, the path that I found in Niger led me into a life that I never expected from my painting life. I was going there to find exotic subject matter, and I was raised, as I told you, my grandfather was a cattle herder. Well, so was my father, so is my husband. I live on a ranch, so herders or that lifestyle is comfortable for me. So, but I could see, I knew that my family, who are all, cowboys at heart, could never support themselves being cowboys. So I could see that the people that were living as herders, they struggled to support themselves because their territories were getting smaller, their desert was getting drier, and but I also knew that my family, they still ride their horses and herd their cows and do that. It's kind of like a hobby now, but they're not going to give up that culture. And so I saw these herders in West Africa kind of struggling to keep their culture, but so proud and so good at what they did. Well, after several years of traveling through with Pierogi, I was leading tour groups for Irma at first, and he would come with us to help them find festivals. And you have to have a Wadabe with you to find their festivals because they're announced only a couple of weeks in advance, and most tourists have to plan months in advance. So you have to have a Wadabe with you to find them. Well, these festivals are so fascinating because what it is a beauty contest. Their main festival, the Jerawal, is a beauty contest that the men compete and the women judge. And that's how they kind of establish this guy is the standard of beauty. This guy is the coolest guy. And the women make those choices, and it's not acceptable for a man to ask a woman to marry him. She has to be the one that chooses. And he has to make himself so irresistible in these festival dances that she selects him. So it's a very it's the women are so powerful in both the cultures, the Wahdabi and the Tuareg, that really made me happy to be around them. So long stories. I um I was so grateful to Pierogi for helping with all of these, with my tour groups, and for I would go and live with them for a month, and I'd migrate with them on a camel, and I spent every afternoon under a tree, making a dictionary because there weren't any dictionaries of their language. And so I got to learn to speak to them, and got very close to them. And they were so generous to me. I didn't really realize how poor they were. But after a couple of years, I bought them a cow because I knew they didn't, that's what their whole lives are based on, is their cattle. And when I went back the next year, I found out from Pierogi's uncle that cow had allowed him to stay being nomadic instead of going into a city to beg. And that hit me like a ton of bricks. I thought, wow, the cow cost me $200. Well, it was a lot of money for me, but it didn't change my life. It did change his. So I knew I had to do something more for the people that I had come to love. And so I started a nonprofit. I started asking for help. And that was the nonprofit started in 97, and it's still going strong. And we have been bringing health care, water, job education to nomads since 97. And our most successful program now is training traditional birth attendants. And these nomadic women who deliver the babies in tents with flashlights are now, they are illiterate, but we've trained them how to deliver babies safely. They are not losing mothers. It had the highest maternal mortality in the world when we started. And so it's just I've become artist humanitarian instead of artist. And that really took over my life just from buying a cow.
It's really interesting also to hear about like the initial links that you had um, from you coming from like the ranch background and the cattle herding background, and I guess these like communal cultural connections that you had. Um, but of course, from the West, we always have grown up learning, about like colonialism and about othering and about this, segmentation of culture. So how do you navigate the like ethical concerns and considerations, especially when it comes to like preserving these cultures that are pretty separate from the Western world and like the age of globalization that we live in? And I can tell from your tone of voice and from the stories you've shared, the love and connection that you have. But I know that I'm sure that it could also be challenging to persuade and encourage others to see different cultures as equal to them and not as like something to look down on or something to like pity. And it's just very interesting to hear how you've been doing this work for over 20 years. And I was just wondering, like, has your approach to thinking about that changed, or what are your
Of
thoughts on that
course,
now?
it's changed. Went into it very naive.
Mm,
But, I've also, when I went into it and I got so involved in it, everybody here thinks I'm crazy.
mm,
That's just, I'm crazy. So I accept that. That's okay. But I started bringing one of the okay, I've got to tell a little bit of this, that my
Please.
second trip, my first trip, I met the Wadabi nomad that became like family. Second trip, but I couldn't go all the way north in the first trip. The rebellion was still raging in the north. Second trip, Irma had gotten permission to go into this area that was rebel held, and we went, and we're sitting in camp, and here comes these 3 trucks charging in with dust flying behind, and they're bristling with guns. They have machine guns on the top. They're all turbaned and glasses, and I'm thinking, "Oh my god, we're going to be murdered." Well, the guy gets out smiling, the guy that's being escorted by all these armed guards gets out and smiling, and he comes over and shakes our hands, and he's the rebel leader. Well, he is the man who had started tourism in Niger originally, and Irma had known him from he ran the agency, and so, he found out she was in town. He came or in town, it wasn't town, it was in the middle of the desert, but but he came to visit, and she was leaving, but he asked if I wanted to stay and travel with he and his rebels and see the desert. So I did. I spent 3, well, it was almost 4 weeks with them unexpectedly. It was gonna be 2. Um, and I learned and what he was this was in the days before sat phones and internet and all of that, and he felt he was a very cosmopolitan guy. He was a nomad at heart. He was born a nomad, but he then got a master's degree in anthropology and business in Paris and in America. And so he started this business, and he loved his culture. And he felt that the world didn't understand, they didn't even know. He felt forgotten. So he asked me to tell their story, and that's why he invited me, is to learn their story. And, well, I had fallen in love with the Wadabi family on my first trip. On my second trip, I fell in love again, and that was with the desert. And the desert, the dunes of Niger are the most extraordinary place, I think, on the planet. And, you know, as I explained to you earlier, most people think I'm crazy, but it's pretty hard not to anyone that I've taken there, and I've taken many people there, over the years, uh, you can't you can't just diminish or ignore the power and the beauty of the desert. So, and that's why the Tuareg love it so much, and they don't leave it. They wanna be there. Even though it's a really brutal, hard place to survive, they know how. So, I'm maybe wandering off track, but, um, bring me back. What was I
Oh, no, I mean, it's interesting because it's not about, you know, helping people leave their current situation, right?
Okay. I remember
yeah.
what I was leading
Okay.
toward. It was that the difficulty of, being accused of cultural appropriation or,
Mm.
all of those things. For me, everything was personal. I don't do humanitarian work to improve statistics. I wanna know the people that I'm working with, and we're working together. They make decisions. Right now, the women that we've trained are running the program, and that's what I always wanted. I didn't want I understood from the very beginning how proud they are of their culture, and one of the things that was very important to the rebellion, because they didn't have, televisions and radios and anything like that. So the rebel leader brought in guitars, and there was the grandfather of all Tuareg music, which has become world famous now. Um, but it was set up by them to communicate. They would make recordings, they would sing, they would make recordings on little cassettes and boom boxes, sending them around to the camps, and they would send messages on where they could come to train to fight the rebellion, and it was their means of communication. It was banned by the government, but of course that made it even more popular. And now I brought many musicians over to do concerts here and raise funds for the foundation. And uh, there was always connections, even people don't have to be able to speak the same language to have a connection. And all of the people, they had very, very, eager, large audiences, and one of them that I brought over for the first time, a couple of years ago, ended up being the first guy from his country to be nominated for a Grammy, in which the Grammy Award is our highest music award in the US. So, they do, there are, are very personal connections that I think, it's kind of difficult. I've lived in that country as a minority. So it's a different situation than the minorities that live in this country. I'm a privileged minority. The fact that I can buy a plane ticket means I'm rich, but it also makes you a target. So either you're a target. It initially was from just somebody that wanted to relieve me of some of that wealth, which I really don't have, but they believed I did because I could and compared to them, I do. Um, because I can buy a plane ticket. But then I became a target because of terrorism moving in. So white skin is not is something that I needed to hide. Um, but so being a minority in that way, it kind of gives you, even though I'm not, I'm been privileged to I won the birth lottery. I was born in America. I was born to a family that was middle class, never had to worry about where we had to, we're going to get our next meal. I know that. And that's why I decided that I owed it to just from being on the planet to try and better the lives of people who didn't have that same birth opportunity. But I learned that they're probably happier. They're poor, but they're probably happier than so many people that I know that have plenty of money and don't and they get so stressed out because their internet wasn't working this morning, or their coffee maker wasn't working this morning, or I got up on the wrong side of I mean, there are all these little things that we stress out about that are just so monumentally unimportant. And I just get calm and peaceful when I'm around the nomads.
So it's incredible to hear all of these stories. But I know that you have also worked on a book. Um, and I would love to hear about that project and what working on that was like.
Well, when COVID shut down, travel for me, that has been my life. If I didn't spend 6 months of the year in Niger, I would be a couple of months there and 2 or 3 other trips somewhere else in the world, and so my life has always been, very so all of a sudden, in fact, I was to get on a plane for Bolivia the day the world shut down, so it was like this shocking thing, and I thought, "Well, I have 30 years of journals, and every trip I write what's happening, I sketch, and the sketches, they sometimes become paintings and sometimes they just enhance a memory. And I can a sketch is so much more effective than a photograph. It can be a terrible sketch, and I remember when I was sketching with the rebels, and they would always be wanting to look through my sketchbook, and And if there was a pretty girl sketch, they'd always want to know where she was. But they'd also, one woman corrected me because I didn't have the mole on her chin, and the other, her braid was in the wrong position. But those sketches were something that really did make a connection. But they also are so evocative for me of what was going on. I can feel the temperature. I can smell it. I can, when I see this stupid, silly sketch that I've done. And so I started pouring through these journals, and I decided that I wanted to focus the book on Niger because that's the country that I know. I have no, I know that I can't be a nomad. I can't I haven't grown up with the same experiences, but I really do have very close friends there that I consider among my closest friends, as close as my friends here in California. And so I have been through longer than for years. I would go to the US Embassy, and they were forbidden to go to the north because it was considered dangerous, but they wouldn't forbid me from going north. So they'd ask me for information about what was going on up there, and I could always tell them. And it's so I poured through these journals and focusing on Niger, and from the first cross country trip to the meeting of Peroji, and then the Tuareg rebellion, and on and on and on. And it's an adventure story. At one point, I had 13 tourists in the most remote desert, and we were attacked in the middle of the night by AK-47 wielding bandits, and we were totally robbed and left in the middle of the desert. And that's one of the chapters. And there are many, many adventures. The thing that going through, for instance, I bought a house in Agadez, and that's the kind of town that's the center of where all the nomads' country is. And because I wanted to have a studio where I could paint. I like to paint large paintings, and I couldn't do that out with the nomads. It's just the light is bad. There's always sand blowing in your oil paint, and it gets heavier and heavier. And it was just really too difficult to do. So I wanted to have a studio that was closer to the people and so if I could do large paintings virtually on site. And so I bought this house, and it was kind of in a remote area of Agadez at the time, but Agadez grew over the years, and it was on the main path to Libya. And I say path because there's no highway between Niger and Libya. It's a cross in the desert, and it's a dirt road out of town, and it's a dirt road the whole way, and or sand road. And but one of the more, um, well, there's so many experiences, but one of the more profound or experiences was when Gaddafi fell, and my house was on the path to Libya, and everybody was getting out of Libya with loot, and it was arms, and I saw a helicopter go by my house, and my guardian comes running, "You've gotta see this, you gotta see this," and I go out to the road, and there's a helicopter sitting on a truck driving by the house, and everybody says, "Well, that's going to Nigeria because 'cause they're the only ones that could afford it." But that flooded the whole of West Africa with arms when Gaddafi fell. No one had been able to afford to have a gun before that, so it was relatively safe, even though there were rebellions. But if you knew the rebel leader, you would be okay. Um, but so I was in a bar in Agadez with a friend, and this guy, he got up to go to the restroom, and this guy sitting at the other end of the bar is kind of looking at me furtively, and I'm getting a little nervous, and so he comes over. and starts trying to talk to me. Well, he didn't speak French or Tamashek or Fulfulde or Arabic. So I didn't know who this guy was and what he was trying to tell me. So finally, my friend comes back from the restroom, and I said, "You got this guy is trying to talk to me, and I don't know, I don't know who he is or what's going on." And the guy just kind of motions to my friend and takes him out. He was a Tubu, and they're the tribe that live in the desert between, on the border with Libya, and they're the ones that are taking out bringing out all the loot, and he wanted to sell us guns. Anything we wanted, a rocket launcher, an AK-47, anything. And so and I can't imagine what he thought I was gonna do with guns, but it just became the Wild West. And so that really the fall of Gaddafi transformed West Africa like nothing else. And then they started, there were I can't tell you the whole story because it would take too long, but terrorism started moving in. I ended up needing to sell my house just because it was not a safe place to be. I was the only white face around, and I would sit in my house for a couple of years. I'd sit in my house and paint, and everybody I opened a gallery in Ojai because part of my mission to tell the story that Mono Dayak, the rebel leader, had asked me to tell was to open an art gallery. And I sold my paintings, and my paintings, as I told you, are about telling stories. And then I sold their work. They make beautiful jewelry and beautiful leather work. And all everywhere I went, I would shop and try to sell work of the artisans that I visited. And so so I'd sit in my house in Agadez, and everybody that wanted to sell something would come to my house, but I would never leave. I couldn't go shopping in the market anymore because it wasn't safe. So that began to, be a difficult situation. So I decided I needed to sell my house, um, but uh, and now I'm still going back, but our humanitarian work is going on, and the goal was never to create a big humanitarian organization. It was to make these people capable of doing what they needed to be able to do to make their lives better. And that right now, we've got 80 midwives working and doing um, bringing the only health care to an area the size of West Virginia. So it's a big, big area that they're dealing with, and they're just pillars of their community now, and I'm so proud of them.
Amazing. Wow. Well, I can't wait to read your book and get to dive into all of these stories in more detail. And yeah, it's
Well, the
incredible.
book is I don't have a publisher yet, but that's coming. I'm close. And the title of the book is Nomad Gal. And because my website is Nomad Gal, and that was kind of an abbreviation for gallery, but it also means girl. So it's been my kind of brand since the beginning. So anyway, Nomad Gals. So far, it's the title of the book, unless somebody decides they need to change it.
Okay, cool. So I was wondering a bit about how your art practice is now. I know you've mentioned that the focal point of your paintings is storytelling. Um, could you tell us a little bit about maybe what you're working on now, or like a notable series or something that, you'd like to share?
Well, when I haven't been able to travel quite as much, one of my series, not my very latest series, but the series before that was a series of portraits of the traditional birth attendants. And these are all women that I know and they're friends, and it was just really fun and they're beautiful, beautiful people. So I did those portraits, but then when I'm home, I tend because I like to walk around. I live in a very rural area, and we have beautiful wildflowers, and I've got a garden that I just totally love. And so I do little what I consider portraits of plants. So the native wildflowers and the flower that happens to pop up in my garden, and I decided to try a new technique. I've always painted oil on canvas, but I've always loved watercolor, and that's what I do my sketches with. That's how I travel. And so I developed a technique of rusting metal. I paint on metal panels, and I can rust it instantly with a brush, with the solution that I paint on it. And it's like painting in watercolor, so that I can create all of these gnarly, puddly things and then do a beautiful, delicate magnolia blossom on the rusty pit. And I love the juxtaposition of that, you know, that it's kind of about the height of beauty of a flower and the decay, and that decay is imminent because it's surrounded by the decay of the metal, which is in the rust. So it's only it's maybe not the same kind of story as I tell about the people that I paint, but it's a story about life. It's the height of the blossom and the decay that will soon come. So rust is what I've been working on lately.
Beautiful. And for those just listening, Leslie's sitting in a beautiful studio that I can imagine has lots of works in progress and lots of ongoing things happening. And it's really cool to get to see you in this really like vivacious space. But the rust imagery is it's close to my heart as well. I also have a affinity for rust. I did a lot of cold casting um, a few years ago, and experimenting with different kinds of rest is always really fun. So I can picture it perfectly.
Well, it's kind of a with the paintings, I do seal it, but I did a lot of I've built a couple of houses, and I use rust, where for any kind of metal outside, because it changes and it just get better. We put all of these metal panels on the fascia of the house, and it just it's beautiful. Keeps changing, and you never have to paint it. And I
That's
love
great.
that, the living quality of it.
I love that. So, I mean, all of these stories that you've been sharing with us today are so incredible and so interesting. And, you have such wisdom to you. And I was wondering if you had, I guess, like any advice to share for like early career artists, emerging artists looking to, perhaps even explore humanitarian elements through their work, or, interested in travel and exploration as you have done in your whole life. And yeah, if you had any, yeah, final words to share in that vein.
I think that the thing that I would say first is don't be afraid. It's so easy to get closed up in your little routine and not step out of it. It doesn't take going to the nomads of the Sahara to step out of your routine, but I mean, you have to have courage to do a painting. You have to have courage to do a sculpture, to try something new, but you don't have to have the long term goal. Take the tiny step, but take it. Don't be afraid to take the it can be just, out your door, something that is not quite comfortable for you. Set yourself up to be a little bit afraid, and then you will learn how powerful you are if you can accomplish that little step, and it doesn't have to be huge. I never thought I would be a humanitarian. And now I think I've made a difference in thousands, tens, hundreds of thousands of lives. I didn't, and all of it was just tiny little steps.
So beautiful. So Leslie, where can people learn more about your foundation and your work, and also support you, and also, follow you online?
My website is nomadgal.com. And if you go there, it directs you to the foundation, to the art, to the jewelry, which I do in collaboration with the Tuareg artisans, and to my stories. So nomadgal.com.
Amazing. Well, Leslie, it's been really wonderful chatting with you and learning about you and your work. And um, best of luck with everything. And yeah, keep us posted about the book. I'm really excited for you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, wonderful. Well, have a great rest of your day. And yeah, I look forward to keeping in touch and learning more as we go.
Yes, please do. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for being here. When you have a moment, please leave us a rating or review in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. And email us at listen@artistpodcast.com. We'd love to hear from you. Our music is by Black Wonder Twins. And now, a final message from Lauren.
Hey, it's your creative career coach, Lauren Hill. If you're ready to find more fulfillment and purpose in your life and make money doing work you love, I want to invite you to sign up for a free coaching consultation. In this 60-minute assessment, we'll talk about where you're currently at in your career and creative life. We'll get clear on where you want to go and what your vision is, and then we'll figure out what's getting in the way of you making it happen. After this intake process, I'll share with you solutions, what it would look like for us to work together, and how one-on-one coaching can help you create the results that you desire, but you have been struggling to create on your own. And if you feel like you're not quite clear on your goals yet, or don't really understand what coaching is, that's okay. Don't let it stop you from signing up for a consultation. I guarantee that you'll leave the consultation with more clarity on your goals and a better understanding of the profound impact that coaching can have on the rest of your life and career. So head over to curatedSplash.com/start-now. That's curatedSplash.com/start-now. And click the free strategy consultation button to sign up now. Hope to hear from you soon.